Hello and welcome. It is 10 o'clock. It is the 5th day of August 2021. I am your grumpy guide to all things gaming, the OGGM. It's still my birthday week. You got one more day to buy me presents. And we are doing RPG a day. Day number 5. Thank you, autocratic.com and castingshadowsblog.com for sponsoring this amazing experiment every year for the past 8 years. And it's completely free, and you can invest as much or as little energy in it as you want. So if you want to take part of this, just check out the autocratic.com, castingshadowsblog.com, or go over to Facebook and download the questions/prompts and be a part of this amazing weirdness. So today's words are throne, gamble, include, and community. And I decided to do community. So right now, as of today, I live within walking distance of 4 game stores. And I live within driving distance of at least 4 more. So there are 8 game stores within an hour of me in almost any direction. How many people can say that? I mean, how many people can say, I can walk to 4 game stores? And it's not that hard. I mean, we're not talking 6 hours. I'm just within 20 minutes, I can walk to 4 different game stores from where I live. I don't know anybody else who can say that. And yet, there is absolutely no role-playing game community where I live, despite the fact that I have so many places to game around me. And I live in a college town. I live near 2 military bases. I live near 3 colleges, several high schools, and yet we have no gaming community. In the 20 years I have lived here, there has been at least 20 game stores / game comic book stores or game / video game pop culture stores that have opened and closed. We've had at least 3 gaming pubs, I guess they're called now. They were just, empty spaces with chairs and tables. One was, was all super themed and did video games and birthday parties and role-playing games. And yet we even had a nerd role-playing game church for a while. And yet we have no gaming community. Why is that? How is it I can live within walking distance of 4 game stores? And really, this town has no role-playing game community. It has a very small Magic the Gathering community. It has a very small and very weird Yu-Gi-Oh community. It has a very small, constantly changing Pokemon community because kids get into Pokemon and then they grow up. But role-playing community is small to non-existent. Why is that? Now, I could go into a long, drawn-out history of the past 20 years and all the points in the timeline. Thank you, Loki, for making that a word now, where events happen to self-destruct the gaming community. But I don't think I need to. I mean, I will give some examples of why. But really, it breaks down to, and this is going to hurt a lot of people's feelings, gamers should not run game stores. Once again, gamers should not open and run their own game stores. I only know one person who is a gamer who has opened a game store, and that game store has been consistently successful. In all the time I have lived here, all these multiple stores were opened and run by young to middle-aged gamers who had no idea how customer service / community service / retail works. It is the bucket list, I think, of probably every gamer to write your own game, publish your own game, work in a game store, or own a game store. And nowadays we could probably also have, televised vlog of your gaming as the bucket list. I have never met a gamer who didn't want to either work at a game store or run their own game store. It's like being a kid in the candy shop. I have free access to all the games I want, and I can play as much as I want. Except, of course, that's not how it works. Now, our long history of multiple game stores being opened and failing miserably is because they were run and operated by individuals who didn't really understand how business, how sales, how customer service, how advertising works. Mostly they were just run by people who thought, if I owned my own game store, I could have an infinite access to being able to play and run anytime I want. Or, then this is the main reason. This is what it comes down to, at least where I live. One, what I just said, that gamers shouldn't open their own game stores. They could work at a game store, but you need to have at least one person who works at a game store who is not really that into gaming, but really just understands how retail works and how advertising and customer service works. And isn't more invested in the running of the business as opposed to just playing games. The other reason we've had so many game stores open and close is anger. Anger. You have game store A. People go into game store A and they expect a certain something. And when they don't get that something, they got angry. And this happened time and time again. And so they would get money together to open up their own store with the sole purpose of putting the other store out of business. That's why there are so many stores within walking distance of my house. And that's one of the reasons why there's such a long history of game stores all being relatively close to each other where I live. And yet that's why there's no role-playing game community, is because most of these stores were opened by people who felt they could do a better job than the store that was already there, and that they wanted to put that store out of business. And they directed all their energy to bad-mouthing the other stores, trying to get people to rob the other stores and bring stuff to their store. You know, these were kids who had money or whose parents who gave them money and who just really didn't understand retail. They just were angry. I mean, there was one store that opened up simply because these two kids, I mean, you know, they were 18, 20, they had money from somewhere, didn't like the price of loose magic cards at the other store. They would argue magic card prices continuously. They would start fights over magic and magic cards. Eventually, those fights became almost physical altercations, and they were banned from the store. In response, they decided to open their own game/magic store a couple blocks from the first store to try and get the magic cards at the price they wanted them and to put that store out of business. They opened their store in anger, and the goal of their store was to destruct the gaming community and put the other store out of business through anger. So that's reason number 2. Reason number 3 is Magic the Gathering and role-playing and comic books are seen as separate entities. A kid would go into a Magic the Gathering store, and I've seen this happen, ask about role-playing and be told there's no role-playing here, or we don't support role-playing. I know one store where there was an employee who repeatedly told kids, we don't support role-playing, we don't carry role-playing, we don't have role-playing in this store, don't come in our store if we do role-playing. And they would treat role players like shit. They would treat pretty much anybody who was a looky-loo like shit. In fact, at one point in time, Felicia Day of, you know, the Flug and role-playing and nerdiness, awesomeness, came into one of these stores looking for a place to talk about role-playing, and she was treated extremely poorly by one of the staff to the point where she left, never came back, and basically said, you know, do not go to the store on her various sources of where she could communicate with individuals. Year after year, stores here open and close mainly because somebody wants to put somebody else out of business because they had a bad experience there. And they will do things like try and undercut magic prices. They will do things like tell role players they're not welcome there. And so the role-playing game community where I live is non-existent because role players were repeatedly treated like crap, because the stores claimed they didn't support role playing, because the Magic the Gathering players were always fighting each other, because stores would open up solely within the reason to put another store out of business. I live within walking distance of 4 stores, and if you walk into one of those stores, sooner or later, they will tell you the reason why they opened up was because they were angry at the way they were treated at another store, and they opened up their store to put the other store out of business. There was one store that for a year did nothing but tell people, don't go to the other store. They are not good at role playing. They are very toxic. They make role playing not fun. You don't want to role play there. You want to role play here. Despite a history of over 20 game stores, despite the fact that I live within 20 minutes walking distance of 4 game stores and an hour distance drive of 4 more game stores, there is no gaming community where I live because so many of the stores were so obsessed with putting the other store out of business and were run by people who didn't know how to actually run a store. It takes a lot of time, energy, and money to run a game store. And at your best, you're going to break even. You're never going to see a profit at a game store. You're never going to get rich at a game store. You're probably never going to be able to truly support yourself or a family running a game store unless you have a second source of income, or you can make the game store extremely profitable. And you have to compete with the internet and big box retail like Target and Barnes & Noble, who carry Magic cards and Pokemon cards and role-playing stuff and can offer them at a much lower price because they can get them at a much lower buy value. And it's just impossible for a small store to compete with 5 other small stores doing the exact same thing, trying to undercut each other's prices, running by people who think opening a game store is going to make me rich. I'm going to be able to play as much as I want. I'm going to be able to get free stuff. And I'm going to put the other guy out of business because he pissed me off. Well, first, you're not going to get to play as much as you want. In fact, if you're running a game store, you're not going to get to play at all because your job is to run the game store. Second, if you open a store out of anger with the whole purpose of putting somebody else out of business, you're going to fail because your job is not to try and put other people out of business. Your job is to try and get people to come into your store. Your job is to advertise. Your job is to create good customer service and good community awareness of your product so people go into your store, because people have a choice. Even 20 years ago, before the internet and before role-playing and card games were carried in Target, people still had choices. They could buy stuff. They could still mail order stuff. They could still go someplace else. Store A and Store B, you don't sell anything I can't get someplace else. What you need to sell, the secret to retail, is good customer service. And these stores have a long history of really bad customer service, of not understanding how sales work. And the role-playing community was basically burned so many times that people just stopped going to the stores. They stopped creating environments where they were open and embracing new players. And what role-playing groups we have before COVID were gaming at their house because they didn't feel welcome at the stores. Or they're going out of their way to go to another store that wasn't part of the death triangle of Ventura County and stores because they felt here was a store that was treating them better. The stores that have been successful are the stores that have adopted a different ideal other than I'm angry, so I'm going to try and put another store out of business. Meanwhile, Cess Games and Anime has remained open for all this time. Partially because their rent is really, really cheap, but partially because even though there are been a lot of members of the staff who have been less than friendly, the store itself has always offered a very laid-back, welcoming, non-intrusive environment where kids could just come in and play Magic, where adults could come in and ask questions about Magic or comments and get answered, where people were treated, not always greatly, but more than not. And plus it's had me there for 20 years being the king of role-playing, though I do have a history of being called some pretty nasty things by the people who ran the other stores, partially because they didn't appreciate the way I did role-playing. And rather than discuss with me, as we said, people would go and I'm going to open a store to put Seth out of business. I'm going to open a store to put Target out of business. I'm going to open my game store to put the Game Workshop out of business because I'm going to get the product cheaper. It's no, you're not going to get it cheaper. You're not going to ever make enough of a profit to get rich and support yourself 100% over running a game store unless you have another source of income or you get really, really lucky. And you understand how point of sale and upsales and attachments work. So yeah, I live in a town with multiple game stores, and yet there is no role-playing game community. There's almost no collectible card gaming community. Pretty much there's no board gaming community, not much of a comic book community, and there should be. But because these stores, 9 out of 10, were so obsessed with being angry and so obsessed with putting the other stores out of business and so obsessed with making a product that they lost their customers. I'm your grumpy guide to all things gaming. If you appreciate this content and want to hear more, let me know. If you don't appreciate this content, I can understand why. If you haven't subscribed yet, come on down and subscribe to my vlog. Help me hit 1,000 subs by the 50th anniversary of Dungeons & Dragons. If you're in Ventura and want to visit the Sessa Games and Anime, the home of me for role-playing, and one of the largest collections of older, obscure titles, don't let the fact that it looks like a thrift shop fool you. There is a cavalcade of awesomeness inside the doors of this store. So tap into awesome. Till next time, happy birthday to me. RPG a day, 2021. Get off my land.